Greg, welcome to podcast.
Thank you. I feel very welcome.
It's a pleasure to have you here. But I know that you haven't been in Mauritius for a very long time, only for a few months. What were your first impressions of the island?
I was here for a few weeks before in 2019 doing leave cover. So this wasn't my first time here.
Okay.
So I had some idea of what to expect. But I guess before I felt I was here very temporarily. And this time, having moved here, it's been a very different feeling. So I saw the diversity last time, but I don't think I truly felt the welcome. So I've really felt the welcome this time. I think particularly since my wife arrived a couple of weeks ago, we've really felt this welcome from people who are very excited to meet new people, very excited to talk about our impressions of Mauritius and to talk about where we were before and what we feel coming here. So I feel extremely welcome.
And in terms of the professional life, and obviously I think the whole world post-pandemic are going through some quite seismic changes. There are challenges, there are opportunities. What would you say so far, what have you found to be the biggest challenge that either Mauritius or the banking sector is facing?
So I think in terms of challenges, we've always got an issue with needing to engage and continue to upskill our staff. I think in a small market, there are fewer opportunities for growth within HSBC than you might have somewhere where we've got a bigger operation. And I think making our staff feel like their contribution is valued and feel like they're part of this bigger organization, that they have this mission not only to support our customers here, but also that it somehow makes sense in the context of the group overall. I think that's very important. But I think also we're still in a kind of post-COVID world. I think there are still some questions about engagement, some questions about coming into the office and other things that I hope are better, but maybe still there's some confusion or some uncertainty around that.
Do you see, I mean, we see it in the financial services sector kind of nationwide, but have you experienced what I call the great migration as well? People actually not only moving within the island, but actually leaving Mauritius for other opportunities?
Yeah, so I think we would say it's only a brain drain if they don't come back. And I think for us, we're very proud that we've been able to export some great Mauritian colleagues to other parts of HSBC. I think that's something we should be pleased about. It's a pity in a way because the people you tend to lose are often the strongest staff from here.
Sure.
But I said to the team when I got here in my first week, I said, look, I think HSBC in Mauritius will really be living up to its potential, not just when you have a Mauritian being CEO here, but actually when you have a Mauritian being CEO in France or in the UK. That would be a real kind of triumph for an international company. So yeah, I think we do see people leaving for professional reasons or personal reasons, but I don't think that we need to see that as something negative necessarily. We just have to keep making it as good a place to work as we can and keep trying to attract new talent locally. We had some wonderful interns recently from 2 universities here, so that was great. The energy was fantastic, but also to keep trying to attract colleagues from other parts of HSBC. So with support from our friends at the EDB to get the permits to bring people in, but to make sure that the team here still has that diversity of experience, both this amazing diversity within Mauritius, but also we are bringing in colleagues from other parts of the group to bring their expertise here as well.
Do you see that then, because I think with every challenge you have opportunities as well. So do you think that would be the opportunity then? So see that as a sort of a circular movement as opposed to a one-way traffic?
Look, I think I wouldn't want to see a situation where we felt that all the local talent was leaving and we were having to import to fill the gap. So I don't think that's the problem, or certainly not for us. But I do think that Mauritius needs to continue to emphasize what's interesting about careers in financial services. Obviously, it's a vitally important economic contributor here. I think in all the conversations I've had over the past few months with the government, with regulators, with all of our clients, I think we see a real opportunity here for the future, particularly in sustainable finance and around ESG. And this is something that obviously is developing as an area, developing in terms of expertise around the world, but particularly around the region here, there isn't necessarily so much expertise. And for Mauritius, we think there's a real chance now to build this expertise here and then to have careers in that area that really is something for the future, that we can say to graduates or to students now, here's a role in something that we will definitely continue to be relevant, is only going to be a growth area.
Yeah.
You can get a great career, but also you can make a contribution to the country and to the economy.
And also I find that with many of our guests that we've had on the podcast, we talked a lot about the infamous Gen Z. And one recurring theme that we find is that they're more and more led by purpose rather than just, they still want a nice compensation package, but they're more driven by, what is the why, what is the purpose of the company. So I think, having this new emerging area makes that link as to the purpose. They're not just, churning paper or making money. It's for a wider contribution to the future of our island and the future of the world as well.
Absolutely. And I think that, look, for me, that's really important. I studied history at university. I didn't necessarily want to be a banker at that point. I spent some time finding it difficult to necessarily feel like a banker or describe myself as that. I think if now I can describe myself as a CEO, that seems okay. I quite like that. But no, the purpose is extremely important. When I first joined the bank, and my mum, who's an academic, was kind of trying to come to terms with me working for a bank, and I was explaining what I was doing, and she said, so I was working in the north of England at that point, helping smaller companies. And she said, that's fantastic. You're helping these companies kind of
raise finance,
invest and grow and employ people and help the economy. And that's absolutely true. That really is our core purpose. Also helping people to buy homes, helping people to send their children to university, all of this. And I think that one of the great things about being in a smaller market for HSBC, in a smaller place, is I think it's much clearer for our colleagues here to see how their work connects directly to customers. I think sometimes in a larger site, if you have tens of thousands of colleagues, there might be a lot of them who've never met a customer directly, can't see exactly how their work connects with it.
Yeah.
But here, I think everybody kind of understands how they're helping customers quite directly. So again, I think feeling the purpose, it should be there. But look, it's my responsibility to make sure that I think the connection to our strategy is something that all of our colleagues understand.
Yeah. Because you mentioned that you studied history at uni. How did you fall into banking then?
I'm not sure I should say fall into. I don't think I feel so. I mean, I worked my way towards it, I guess. Okay. So after university, I went to Japan on a scholarship from the Daiwa Anglo-Japanese Foundation. So it's a fantastic scholarship. I spent a year learning Japanese full time, which was an amazing opportunity. And then I worked at the UN. And then I worked for Herbert Smith. So as a paralegal, I thought I maybe would do law conversion. Mm-hmm. And I worked for them there in Tokyo and then in Hong Kong. And actually, I'd written my dissertation on Hong Kong and Singapore. I'd always loved Hong Kong. And being in Hong Kong, look, the position of HSBC in Hong Kong is just unbelievable. I think the contribution that the bank's made to the economy there, to society, the position it has. You've got the kind of 2/3 of the banknotes that come out of the ATM are HSBC banknotes.
Wow.
So you feel a real connection there, again, to purpose, to history, to all of this. And I found this wonderful program where the bank would kind of send you around the world and you'd get to keep rotating and doing different jobs and building a really diverse career. So I think, again, look, you talk about Gen Z or talk about our younger colleagues. I think it's not just about younger colleagues. I think if we look at colleagues here, a lot of them, even within Mauritius, they've been very flexible. They've worked for 20 or 30 years, but over so many different areas, some people get into a job they like and they stay in that, and that's great, and they get very good at it, and it's wonderful that there are opportunities for them to do that. But I think there's also huge value to people moving around, experiencing different things,
and to learn new things and to be challenged by new things. We were talking before recording about doing things where you feel a bit uncomfortable.
Absolutely, and I think in a way, honestly, sometimes I feel like every time I get kind of comfortable in a job, it's time to move almost, and I think it is that new challenge, it's the new opportunity to learn. So to be here, to have a new set of colleagues, a new set of clients, a new set of challenges, it's very exciting.
Yeah, and also the cultural aspect as well, because I would have thought that the kind of culture in Mauritius is quite different to that in Hong Kong. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I think it certainly is, but again, the culture in Hong Kong was not like the culture in London, was not like the culture in LA or in Leeds. I think everyone feels their culture is special, and I think everyone is right. Like everyone is right. Everyone's culture is special. I think here the diversity of experience, the diversity of background, of culture, I think sometimes, I wouldn't say people take it for granted, but people are used to it here. I think coming in and experiencing that is fantastic, and I think that is a real superpower. I think in a lot of places you talk about diversity in the office, but I'm not sure. I think in many places it's an aspiration.
Yes.
I think here, if you look around the team,
I
mean, you've got
itself.
It's amazing.
And I always found it, I remember when I was studying and working in London, sometimes we'd meet a group of school friends talking, chatting away in the tube, and Mauritians tend to be quite loud. I don't know, when we speak Creole, it tends to be quite loud, and we always sound very excited. And you can see people looking at us, not understanding. They are speaking the same language, but they all look so different from each other. You've got someone who from a Sino background, someone who's Caucasian, someone who's more like African, Asian. It's that melting pot that I think is. It's wonderful.
But I love that, and I always quite enjoyed, maybe not always, but most of the time I quite enjoyed in Japan where people would be surprised when I could speak Japanese. I mean, most of the time that feels like kind of respect. Some of the time it gets a bit much if they're surprised that you can say good morning, but the language here is a big part of it, and that's why I'm making a bit of effort with Creole, so I'm kind of doing my best. And,
you're doing all right, actually, but I guess you spoke French already. Or not?
I mean,
really?
I kind of spoke French from school, but as we were saying before, I find it very difficult to speak in proper French now because I can never remember what gender anything is, and then you kind of grind to a halt. So
yes, indeed. One of the reasons we're here today as well is that this episode will be aired during the week of the International Men's Day. I have to confess, I was surprised that there is an International Men's Day. So maybe I should just ask you, so what does it mean to you? What does that day mean to you?
I think two things really. I think one thing, it's a great opportunity to recognize the role that men are playing in the office, but also outside the office. And I think this evolving role. So I think that's very positive for us to recognize that at work. But I think the other thing is to shed a light on some issues that are not necessarily particular to men, but issues that affect men, particularly about mental health and physical health, and some of the pressure put on that from gender stereotyping, and this feeling maybe some men have had because of traditional roles that they've found it more difficult to speak up, or it's been more difficult to talk about these things. So I think all of these initiatives that allow people to speak up and to talk about these issues are very positive. But I'd hope for both of these topics, of course, the positive impact isn't just on men.
Sure.
In the same way that International Women's Day is a great opportunity for all of us men to kind of thank and appreciate women, I'd hope that this brings common issues and allows everyone to appreciate their colleagues and family and friends.
Yeah. And I feel that, I mean, when I started looking into it, because as I said, I was quite surprised. So I started looking into it, and obviously every year there's a theme. And I saw that this year's theme was zero male suicide. And that made sense to me. As you said, that, when we think of celebrating men, we, as a woman, you initially think, they already have it so good. But at the same time, you think that on the other side of the coin, as you said, as you move away from traditional roles, I think the pressure of keeping or having these traditional roles has a knock-on effect. And I think mental health among men is something that is still globally, not just in Mauritius, very taboo. So I think it's a really important topic actually for this year. Do you find that we talk enough about male mental health?
I'm not sure we do, and I think that it goes with a lot of topics that probably we don't talk enough about. And the more we can do as leaders to set an example and to be open, I think that's really important. I think within HSBC, I think one current colleague and one former colleague, so Stuart White in the asset management business and Brian Hayworth, who used to work at HSBC, have both in their own way been very public about mental health, either for themselves or for their families. And I think it's extremely important because there really is a role for senior leaders, I think, to demonstrate that you can create a kind of safe space to raise these issues. I think you're right. I think it's all bound up with traditional gender roles and stereotypes, and often, of course, yes, in some ways men benefit from the stereotypes, but in other ways they do increase the pressure, particularly in these areas. And I think it is about mental health. I think it's also about physical health, and men, I think, again, stereotypically, to load onto the stereotype, but men are not so good at going to the doctor.
Yes.
And maybe don't kind of get things checked as much as they should, and are not so disciplined. And that's something everybody needs to take more responsibility for. But yeah, I think this is certainly an important area. And I think also an area where maybe COVID and the experience of the past few years have put more pressure in some respects. I think everybody's mental health suffered in general, but I think also have given us a great opportunity to be more open about these topics, but also to consider more carefully this kind of who is the person at home and who is the person who goes out to work. And when both people or all people became the person at home, even if they were also the person who was going out to work, that kind of it shook things up. I think it made it very difficult for people, but it gave us also an opportunity to think about how we want to come out of COVID now and what positive lessons we could take from it.
Yeah, and I feel that particularly in the workplace now, I'm not too sure about Mauritius, but certainly abroad in Europe and elsewhere, it's now more and more embedded into, you have company psychologists, you have access to, and also people just generally talking about it more openly removes that stigma, that feeling of shame. Because I think for a long time, just because it's something we don't see, because in terms of physical health, it's generally something that we can see when someone's poorly. Mental health, it for a long time wasn't seen as an illness, actually. So, and particularly for men, because they have to be, strong and seen to kind of carry the family. I think for a long time, they just felt that, particularly in the workplace, this is, my role is to support the family, so I've just got to get on with it.
I agree. And I think that actually talking about being able to see it or not, I think that's also maybe one of the post-COVID challenges, is that although flexible working is fantastic and is a great opportunity, there is still a value to being in the office. Not all the time, but there definitely is still a value to people coming into the office. And I think the chance of noticing how people are really doing, the chance of being able to have a really open conversation with somebody over Zoom, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And this kind of unstructured time, it's very difficult to do without people being in the office. So I think, while of course we're happy to continue to allow some level of flexibility, and people don't have to come into the office all the time, and people can kind of work in a way that suits them and the requirements of their role, I still think it is important for people to be coming into the office at least some of the time, or maybe a lot of the time, because it is that interaction. It does allow you to see how your team are really doing, to see the body language, to see how people behave outside of meetings as well as inside them. So I think that is important. I think, again, that's something maybe where in a smaller office, also one where people are very well connected across the teams, I feel like on the positive side, the level of engagement is high. People are kind of watching each other, keeping an eye on each other. That's also maybe a bit of a challenge, because I think if people feel like they're not doing well, then very difficult to escape. So I think the pressure is increased then.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and you're someone who's travelled far and wide, as you said. You've had the chance to benefit from the HSBC program. So, from what I understood, you've lived in North America. You've lived obviously in Europe, in Asia, now technically part of Africa. Have you experienced a different approach to men's role and place in society across these different? I suppose the timeline was different as well. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think definitely yes. But I would think, in a way, if you put all of these workplaces on a kind of spectrum of very, very traditional to really not particularly traditional,
Sure.
you would still find different ones in different countries. So certainly in Japan, some companies are extremely traditional and have very few female staff above junior roles.
Okay.
But again, I didn't find that at the UN. I didn't find that at Herbert Smith. So I think it's different. I think, of course, the societies have different expectations, maybe have different levels of how traditional things are and assumptions. But I think it's always for us in companies, in whatever society, to try to push against those assumptions and offer what we believe are the right opportunities, almost regardless of what the society around us is doing. We need to set an example, even if we're a small company. Look, I'm very conscious here that with HSBC in Mauritius, I've taken the percentage of female CEOs from 100% to 0% just by arriving. So I feel always a bit conscious of that. But I think we're doing well across the rest of our management team. So we just have to keep making an opportunity wherever we can, being as inclusive as we can, and searching out the best candidates from as broad a range as we can.
Yeah, and also, I mean, it's not related to gender. I always also say as well, diversity is not just about gender. It's one aspect, and it's an important aspect, but I think we should also look at it from all the different perspectives. And also in Mauritius, being a multicultural society, it's important to have that diversity as well. And, tricky one, but I think from what I've seen so far, things are definitely evolving in the right direction, albeit sometimes very slowly, but still going at least we're talking about it now. For a long time, these are some of the things that people felt they shouldn't be talking about.
No, absolutely. And we actually have, at HSBC internally, there's this kind of self-disclosure of ethnicity and religion and other characteristics. And I think we've been encouraging our colleagues to answer. They can answer that they don't want to disclose, but even that in itself is an answer. Sure. And I think one of the things that I was saying was exactly your point, that if we're going to make decisions based on data, we need as much data as possible. We need the data to be as rich as possible, because otherwise it's relatively easy to divide into kind of big blocks. You can say you could divide by gender, you could divide here by kind of local or expat, you could divide maybe by ethnicity or by religion in some countries where you've got those statistics. But you're absolutely right, that would only give you a small part of the picture.
Yeah.
And that here you could look at, for example, for our colleagues, colleagues of South Asian heritage who are Mauritian,
Okay.
colleagues of South Asian heritage who've come from India or from Bangladesh, colleagues who've come from India who are Muslim, colleagues who are Mauritian Indian Muslim, all of this.
Yes.
This is all, if you just said, oh, this is kind of South Asian colleagues, this would give you no real idea. Within that, there would be huge diversity of approach.
Yeah.
So I think you're absolutely right. It's not only skin deep, and the more information we have, the better we can make these decisions. And undoubtedly, the more diverse the team, the better the decisions you get in terms of gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic group, educational background, experience, all of this. That's certainly will make us all the strongest possible employers and contributors we can be.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. And one thing that I often hear, and that goes into the diversity debate as well, is that a lot of women, but I think that applies across the board, often complain that generally people, when you see an advertisement for a board role, people look for an accountant or a lawyer, as if only accountants and lawyer can sit on boards, when actually that goes into the diversity mix as well. There should also be diversity of skills and background, as you said.
Yeah, and I think as I mentioned before, I think one of our focuses here is really on upskilling the staff, and I think I'm conscious that there might be historical reasons why the most senior layers of a large organization have more men in them than women, as it's been built up over decades. And of course, we're working to address that as much as we can immediately. But also, I think we need to do that for the future, and we need to make sure we're looking after our more junior female colleagues, giving them opportunities, giving them training, in some cases giving them additional training if we feel they're missing out on chances, to make sure that over the coming years they will be the ones who could be credible candidates to be on external boards or to be on executive committees or in these other roles.
Last question for you, Greg, and this is a question I've always wanted to ask of a man, because this question is always asked of women but never of men. But because it's International Men's Day, I hope you're not offended by the question.
I'm now quite worried about what this question is going to be.
It's okay. A very common question for women. How do you balance fatherhood and your professional life?
So I would say this was very interesting that, so our daughter is slightly more than 2.
Okay.
And my understanding of the meaning of work-life balance changed completely, because I realized that, and I'd had colleagues before who talked about this, and I just never understood it. I'd heard them talk about it, but I never really understood it, that when you don't have children, in general, when you don't have caring responsibilities, then in general, work-life balance is a balance between being at work or doing what you want to do outside of work.
Yes.
And when you're a parent or when you have caring responsibilities of any sort, then it's a balance between being at work and having responsibilities outside of work. And that doesn't mean that isn't what you want to be doing. It doesn't mean that isn't what you enjoy, but it's very different. So I think, look, for me, I feel very fortunate that my wife was able to come here with me. She's able to work from home. Because both of us are working, we're able to afford childcare, which kind of means that we can both work.
Sure.
But I think for me, it's really enriching to have people at home who remind you I hope HSBC aren't listening too much, who remind you what your real priorities are. Sure. Of course, work is important, but family is family. Yeah. And I think also who, while supporting you, don't really want to hear too much about work. So you can grumble for, 5 minutes. And then after that, it's like, okay, that's nice. Now my daughter doesn't even want to hear 5 minutes, but she does.
Although she works herself.
I saw
her on the laptop.
Exactly.
The
So
keyboard.
if you have a keyboard in front of her, she will hammer away at the keyboard.
I'm
and
working.
If you say, as you saw in the video, she says, I'm working. So she knows what working looks like. But no, I think my life now, it's not that we didn't have a wonderful time before we had a daughter,
sure,
but my life now is so much richer. And if I don't have a lot of time to do precisely what I want to do, to read as many books as before, that doesn't matter. My life is
course.
much richer and more rewarding than it was before.
Yeah.
So,
And what I love is some of the questions that I get. It's just, maybe I'm biased because I'm a mother, but sometimes it literally blows my mind. A few months ago, my son asked us at the dinner table, and we didn't quite know what to answer to that. What language does God speak? So you get these really profound questions where you think, I don't know, it just blows my mind. So I feel that there's, one of the things that I've found is that I learn as much from them, or perhaps more from them than they learn from us, because they're just going to do their own thing at this age.
No, I agree, absolutely. And without wishing to suggest that a 2-year-old provides useful practice for how to manage people in the office, I think you're right. I love being forced to answer questions. I like asking questions, but I like being forced to answer them. And I think you're right. These questions, maybe questions like that don't have an answer, but you have to think about them.
Exactly.
But certainly, no, being pushed to keep learning, you're right. They are our teachers, definitely. I think it's not just that they teach us through children teach us through their behavior, through their openness, through their willingness to try new things, but also just by forcing us to frantically go on the phone and look up the answers sometimes to these questions. What is the population of wherever?
Exactly. Anyway. Yeah, and also rejoining what you said about the professional life, I see them as very complementary. Pushing us to be uncomfortable sometimes, and having to take the uncomfortable decisions, and having to be sometimes a tough parent, just as we have to be the tough manager or boss at work.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to remember, I think, which is very important, that however important you might occasionally feel like you are at work, or how much people might try to make you feel important at work, when you go home, you work for them.
Exactly.
You work for them, really.
Exactly. I often tell them, well, do you think I'm your slave? And they always say yes.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of, no, it's fine. So I think the grounding, that grounding is really important. And no, look, it makes us well-rounded people. And look, what a privilege to be able to be in Mauritius with a small child. I cannot imagine. Yeah. We were down at La Prairie. This beach is like, it's like something you couldn't even imagine. Yes. It's just so beautiful. Sure. So, so happy to be here.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you for your time. I know it was a very short notice, so thank you for your time. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon.
Yes, thank you. And thanks very much for fitting me in and for the fascinating conversation.
Pleasure.